Isaacs came from Czechoslovakia as a refugee and began her professional life working in an art gallery before discovering her lifelong calling in Montessori education. She trained as a Montessori teacher and went on to found Seedlings Montessori Nursery in Oxfordshire, which she led from 1991 to 2007. Over the years, Barbara worked with Montessori St. Nicholas, the London Montessori Centre and Montessori Centre International, which she led, shaping courses and teacher training since its very beginning. She is also one of the founding members of the Montessori Accreditation and Evaluation Board, now Montessori Accreditation International, and the author of Understanding the Montessori Approach and Bringing the Montessori Approach to Your Early Years Practice. Her passion has always been for high-quality teacher training and early years education that encourage curiosity, creativity, and exploration while nurturing the spirit of the child. She has traveled widely, lecturing, mentoring, and supporting Montessori initiatives around the world, and served as president of Montessori Europe, helping to renew collaboration within the movement. One of her most influential contributions was creating a guide that mapped Montessori principles to the early years foundation stage framework, building a vital bridge between Montessori and the state education system in the UK, and enabling dialogue between Montessori schools and Ofsted inspectors in England. Barbara is also a devoted grandmother to 4 grandchildren, 3 little girls and a lovely little baby boy, and continues to share her wisdom and love for Montessori wherever she goes. Barbara, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I have a long history with you, and the Bloom School, my baby, would not be where it is today without you, who were there at the very foundation. So thank you for that.
Well, I thank you for the opportunity of being able to see the school to grow and develop and support the professional development of the teachers. I have always admired your vision and your commitment to what you have achieved.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you. So the podcast is really all about human potential and the diversity of human potential in all its expression. And so I like to start always from the very beginning of my guest's journey. So you grew up in Czechoslovakia and you spent most of your life in the UK as an adult, even as a young adult. I'm curious about how living between cultures for you has shaped you as a person and how it's influenced your work as an educator.
I had a very unique upbringing in that my mother moved in a very artistic community. And so there was always a lot of influences of writers, painters, creative people who would come and visit our house. So I was an observer of human relationships from very, very early on. I often reflect on the influence the communist era had on me as a human being. And I think it gave me a sense of needing to be fair to people and wanting reasonable standard of living for everybody without having to lie or pretend. So this idea of being free to express my ideas and my thoughts and my beliefs is very closely aligned to my later commitment to Montessori, because that was one of the things that attracted me to it. But at the same time, when I have observed life of young women in England, I have not come with this feeling of being inferior or not being able to achieve something. I had a sense that I could do what I wanted to do once I was in England. And I never felt that I was inferior to my male colleagues, which there is often that kind of gender divide in the UK, which I have never felt. So I have been given something by my Czech upbringing, both from my mother's point of view, but also from the way how society contributed to equally to boys and girls being educated.
And what is your relationship with your mother country now?
It is a country that exists, that I was born in, that I have warm feeling about, but I personally do not feel either Czech or English. And I think that's lots of people who live in several countries have got kind of divided loyalties. I feel much more a sense of I'm a person in the world, and I will support what happens in the world. I'm kind of an international person in the sense of the 20th century rather than 21st century. Kind of slightly romantic idea.
So now I understand maybe a bit more why you started your career in art. Is it because of this influence in your childhood?
When I came to England, I initially lived with a family and looked after their 2-year-old child, but I always said I would like to work in an art gallery. And I found an opportunity to do that. And I learned a huge amount about English Victorian art whilst I was interested in modern art and other things. So again, it gave me an opportunity to see part of English life or part of life of a community quite well and quite deeply, because I stayed in the art gallery for 10 years. But, it was quite boring sometimes. Nothing, unless we were preparing for exhibition or researching, there were days when very few people would come in. So it required me to entertain myself in some way or another. So after 10 years, I thought I need to leave. I need to find another way. And the family with whom I initially lived, the father died and left me a little bit of money. And I thought, how should I spend this money? And he really loved children. And I thought, okay, I'll go and train as a Montessori teacher, because his youngest child that I looked after went to a Montessori school. So there was some kind of connection to do that. And that's how I kind of changed from art to Montessori in a very natural way, because I had the introduction. I could see what Montessori had to offer to young children.
Through that child?
Absolutely.
What was it that you noticed immediately in that child?
As a child, I had huge difficulty learning to read, and she was able to read at the age of 4. And I thought, this must be miraculous. How is it possible? Which, of course, is not at all what Montessori is about. But for me, that was that initial impulse of wanting to find more. They were quite a unique family, and I kind of felt that I had a sense that it could give me some other opportunity.
Earlier on, you talked a little bit about the connection between your life and Montessori, but when you started discovering, what did the philosophy awaken in you personally?
Initially, what I loved about the philosophy was this sense of freedom for the child, because my upbringing in the Czech Republic was quite bourgeois, quite restricted in being always compliant to the culture and to the social norms, and there being expectations of behaving in a certain way. And this idea of the child being free, yet respected. I think that the idea of respect and trust in the child's capacity to be themselves was really at the heart of what I loved about the philosophy. And then when I came to train, I loved the order, I loved the material. Once again, I loved all the things that I now, at the end of my long career, I question as, is this really what Montessori is about? Yes, the environment is beautiful. Yes, the materials are wonderful. But, you could have a Montessori school on a desert island if you understand the principles and if you take the essence of the materials and try to find similar things in nature. So it is interesting how Montessori has allowed me to make yet another personal journey of learning and discovery and exploring what education is really about.
Would you like to expand a little bit on that right now? Or
I think that we have reached a point in education where, as a society, as Western society, where we have expectations that education should produce something which is to some extent quite mediocre, something that is very compliant with the material world, that always looks at what is the value of this, how much money can I make? When in fact, what school gives you is probably a fraction of what one learns through one's whole life. The things that you learn at school are not the things that are written in the curriculum. You definitely need to learn how to read and write, and how to compute a little bit. But how you learn to relate to other people and what kind of friendships you make, what kind of relationships you make, how you value and recognize the gifts that everybody has is really much more fundamental. But it takes one's whole life to continue to learn about that.
Of course. But education can give you the foundation for that, in the sense that it can give you the space and the accompaniment to be able to allow it to start blossoming within you.
And I suppose that that's what Montessori for me gave to the children. It gave them space and time to be themselves. And it then required the sensitivity of the teacher or sensitivity of the parent to allow the child to grow and blossom in the areas that they are interested in, and perhaps just giving a little bit here and there where more was needed, or making suggestions so that children could really explore lots of areas of learning without narrowing themselves to something very specific, which often is not what they ultimately want to do in their life. Does it make kind of sense?
It makes total sense, and it does make me think that we're, maybe fundamentally she was addressing the spirit of the child and giving it space to find itself or to express itself. And it leads me to my next question, which is, I know that you have a particular interest in the spiritual development of both the child and the teacher. And I wanted to ask you if you could maybe for our audience explain what that meant for Montessori, and how this understanding has evolved within you over the years.
So I think that for me, the spirit of the child is the human potential, the capacity each human being has for creativity, critical thinking, exploration. But how each person approaches it comes in a slightly different way. We are not like peas in a pod. We are always slightly different and more interesting. We have different journeys through which we reach or work towards that potential. I think that the creativity of the human being is something that I really, really value. And it can be creativity in knitting, or it can be creativity in how children approach mathematical problems or science experiments. It's not always linked to artistic expression, but it is this human potential to create something absolutely wonderful, something that overwhelms you for its beauty. I kind of feel that the spirit of the child has to be in some way connected with nature, because we are creatures of the earth. We are part of the animal kingdom, and therefore our relationship with nature is fundamental to our mental health and to the spirit of who we are. This idea of looking at the moon at night or seeing a rainbow, those moments that nature gives us that cannot be bought, cannot be reproduced in any other way but just feeling them inside yourself. So for me, that's the spirit of the child from the and spirit of human beings. But Montessori also talks about the spiritual preparation of the teacher. And that is something that I feel should allow you as an adult the opportunity to really learn from the children. To be able to do that, one has to be very mindful of one's attitudes, of one's language, of one's whole demeanor, how one presents oneself to the child, and always reflecting on what is one learning from the children, because particularly the youngest children from, birth to 6 are unpredictable. They will not buy into ideas of adults just because you are an adult. They are interested in what you do, but they will always find their own way. Mm-hmm. And understanding what that child's own way is probably part of that spiritual preparation. And that requires continuous learning, continuous reading, continuous study of oneself. Because every day in my professional life, I would go home and I would think, well, I could have done that better.
It's experience, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need the foundation in terms of the understanding of what we're trying to achieve. But then once you have that understanding, you have to just dive in and experience yourself.
And, when I think how I started and what I expected of the children when I first taught and what I expected that Montessori could or should give to the children, and what I see now when I spend my day with my grandchildren, when we are totally free just to be together, that being together gives you so many opportunities to really find out what the child is about. So giving children time to be is probably the biggest gift we should give them today.
Now that I am in the classroom, I understand that in a totally different way. And I've also realized how at the beginning I was trying to meet what I thought I had to do. And it took me a good year and a half to turn that around and really allow myself to allow them to show me. But if you've not experienced it as a person, as a child, it's difficult to really...
And also you feel that your responsibility is to give them the best.
Yes.
So you sometimes just rush things, or you don't take a deep breath and say something, and it's quite not the right thing to say. And you suddenly see what the child, they look at you and you see you are so disappointed for them that you have caused them that pain or worry or anxiety, all of that stuff. Being able to continue to be respectful to the children is really, really important.
It is, and in the generation of you've followed many generations of teachers. I see a real change, for instance, in parents, at least in the environment in which I am, from 20 years ago and from now. I have parents who are totally different in their understanding of the child and what they want for their children, and so on and so forth. I think in my environment, teachers don't have as much freedom because of the system in which they're in. They're still very much reined in by the system. But have you seen an evolution in teachers or in people coming to be trained over the years?
I have certainly seen an evolution of the young person or the women who come to train. I think that there is an expectation that things will happen more quickly than they do, that they don't allow themselves time to grow. They don't allow themselves always time to reflect. I have certainly seen a huge difference in the parents who bring their children into the Montessori school. I think that the parents are much more knowledgeable, and that knowledge sometimes causes them a lot of anxiety.
That's true.
Particularly women are much better educated. So the mums who come with quite relevant questions. Recently, I have been helping our local preschool to support the management of the preschool, and I have found that there has been a tension between what the teachers expect from the parents and what the parents expect from the teachers. I'm still grappling with this idea of what is it that makes it so difficult for the teachers to be, to some extent, more respectful of the parents, but also for the parents to trust their own judgment when they send their child to a preschool, that there must have been a reason why they have sent them, and that there must be a sense of trust between the parents and the teachers, so that the child can benefit from this unspoken but very positive flow of energy between the two. And I think that when there is a tension, then the children pick up on it immediately.
And they're very confused by it because they pick up on it, but they don't exactly understand what's going on. So
they don't understand what's going on. They are getting these double messages.
Yes.
And I think that children's lives are tricky these days. They do too many things, and they are, again, even at home, they are not given time to be, or just to be in nature or having a different kind of experience than what happens in school. So it's really important for the teachers to articulate to the parents how important it is to have time and just to be together, rather than always striving for something that maybe the children don't even want.
Yeah, they don't have time to be bored. I read something very interesting the other day. Apparently, there was, it would have to be fact checked, but I found it very interesting that they did this study and realized that parents who don't read a bedtime story or two every evening, but instead sit with their children and talk about their day, saying, well, today mummy had a lot of people in her office and she got angry for certain reason. And then she was thinking about why she got angry, or they talk about how, their emotions or how they experience their day. It's much more beneficial for the children because they've noticed that the children then go back into their lives and maybe a few weeks down the road will use strategies and will use the experience of their parents to build their own. And so this connection to the real life of their parents and this sharing of reality, as opposed to, not that reading a book to your child is a wrong thing, but as opposed to always trying to maintain your child in this other world separated from them, is wonderful.
That's really, really interesting. My daughter always says to the girls, how has your day been? And all three have got just one answer: good. Now that the oldest one is 9, she talks a little bit more about school, and so she shares a little bit more. But I think that the capacity to talk about feelings or kind of impressions you get of other people or how life is for children and the parents, I think that is really, really important. And I have come to value that, especially with our youngest granddaughter, because she is very human focused. If we travel on a bus, she will not look out of the window. She will look at the people on the bus and want to understand what they are all about. The other day, she looked at a picture of 2 people in a magazine, and she said, he is very sad. And certainly the man had a very sad expression in his face. I thought that was amazing, that a 3-year-old could have this perception of, or could recognize a human feeling in another person that they don't even know. So, I'm very curious to explore this idea. How do you feel? What does it mean to you? And how do I feel? Because sometimes the children, when I look after them, they don't understand that I can be anxious about them doing something. And they say, Granny, does it give you the creeps? And they do they are all very physical, so they do something very unexpected. And I try to explain to them how my feeling for them influences my behavior. They translate it into creeps and do a little bit more.
What I find really interesting in your example of your youngest, who's 3 and is that she's interested in the feelings. Not only that she understands, but that she's also interested in, because it's an age where they're very self-centered. So the fact that she's interested in how somebody else must be feeling and looking at the recognition, recognizing elements, that's very interesting.
But I think it must be to do with the fact that she's the 3rd girl in the family, not necessarily gender-wise, but because she has had to learn about her world by observing the reactions of the others.
Okay, yeah.
So that must have contributed her a little bit. I mean, she still remains very self-centered. If something is hers, it's hers. But there is definitely an element in her personality which I have not seen in many children, and that is a deep interest in other people. So she will always ask when we meet somebody in the street, what is their name? Sometimes I have to make it up.
I love
because I don't know. And then she says, what's their number? Meaning, how old are they?
Oh.
But she's also thinking much more deeply about her environment. We were putting the chickens to bed in the evening and the moon was in the sky. And because they have got a lot of sky over their garden, she can see the moon being in different position in the sky. And she said, Granny, where is the moon going? Again, a very philosophical question for a 3-year-old.
But because she's very observant, they see everything.
Yeah. She's incredibly observant and focuses on things, which to me, again, she embodies the real spirit of the human being, the curiosity, the awareness, the opportunities to explore. Once she goes to school, she will be in the domain of other people.
Yes, true.
And the influence of other children.
Obviously, your Montessori is your first love, and you've worked as a Montessorian most of your life. But I know that you've been very interested and always kept in touch with what other approaches have to offer. And I know you've also created bridges and contacts with these other approaches. So could you please share with us, what are the common grounds between these other approaches that you find interesting, and what you feel we can learn from each other?
I think that fundamentally, all the approaches like Steiner, Reggio, democratic education, all those approaches value the whole child and see the child as a whole, not as the thinking child or the playful child. They see and the importance of the child in relationship to an environment and in relation to other people. I think those three things remain permanent in all those approaches, all striving to give the child best possible opportunity in their lives. The difference is in the methodology. The thing that separates us is the language, because each one of those approaches has got its own jargon, and that jargon is sometimes difficult to overcome. So trying to share ideas through examples is probably the best way of demonstrating the similarities. Because once you share, the child in my preschool did this, and this is, once you have those little vignettes of real life, you come to think, actually, it's exactly the same as what we do. And with the earliest foundation stage, in its original 2012 form, we had for the first time a kind of framework or approach to children which embodied all these approaches. Seeing the child as an individual in a rich environment, well supported by an adult. That was very easy to demonstrate how Montessori does it, but it also gave opportunities to people from the Steiner movement to express their pedagogy in the context of the shared language of the earliest foundation stage. If you remember at your conference in Sarajevo, we had so many educators from different approaches. And when we came together on the Sunday morning, we were very united in the celebration of the child. And that was the most memorable thing of the whole conference, that in fact we were all there in the service of the child. And we might, if we were more patient in listening to each other, we would actually embrace each other and support each other rather than saying, well, we are Montessori, so we are different because you don't understand what we do. It's actually not that difficult to understand what we try to do.
And fundamentally, if we're all very coherent with ourselves and the focus is the child, then there should be a million different ways, different methodologies for each child. So
absolutely,
there has to be a diversity.
You have got your toolbox.
Yes.
But there will always be one child in the classroom you will not find the right tool for, and you have to search.
Yes.
And you have to get to know them in order to find the way to support them. And that's why having a pedagogy which is more open and really reflective of the relationship that the child has with the environment, the child has with the other children, they have with their family, all of that makes the whole person. And that fundamentally is shared by all the different approaches. But we as professionals need to be more mindful of listening carefully to what people say, rather than always jumping on the bandwagon and saying, we do this or we do this differently, therefore we are better. Actually, we are all trying to support the children the best we can. With the tools that we have, with our own personal limitations, which we can bring our own baggage, and then the movement itself brings its own baggage.
Of course.
So managing to overcome and be open and staying open And being careful and respectful in listening, I think, is really, really important. Once we had a wonderful opportunity to have a dialogue with the head of the Froebel community, Steiner community, and myself. And we were invited to do a presentation about our approaches in the V&A Museum in London. And it was fantastic because the way how we got that was different, but the spirit was the same. And that was such a celebration of what may be possible if we unite, if we work together. And we would be stronger in articulating some of those ideas to government.
So talking about government, you mapped the Montessori principles to this framework to facilitate the dialogue between Montessori and this framework and show that it completely was compatible, which made it easier for people who came into Montessori environments to understand what was going on and to understand that it was very compatible with what was happening in more traditional nurseries. How did that come about, and what impact do you feel that you had?
When in 2012 the new framework came out, as always with new ideas, there was some question of how will the Montessori community, how will the Steiner community, how will the groups of educators on the periphery of the state sector, how will they manage? We were invited to the Department for Education to have a discussion, or they came in fact to us in the college. It was that we delivered it on our own ground, which was probably beneficial at that time. We asked the government to endorse Montessori in writing. Could the minister do a letter recognizing that Montessori has contribution to make to the whole economy of preschool education? And they said, oh, that would be very difficult. But you could write something mapping Montessori against the EYFS. And I said at that moment, will you pay for it? Because the minute they paid for it, they indirectly endorsed it. And they said, yes, but you have to have it ready in the beginning of January. And the meeting was in the beginning of December. And I said, no problem. We'll have it. And we definitely did deliver it on the deadline. It was a huge achievement because
I still have the little booklet and everything. I remember very well.
But, so interesting because until we started talking about this podcast, I have totally forgotten that I did this work because other things superseded it. But that moment when the first documents came with the stamp of Her Majesty's Stationery Office made me extremely happy, because it was a true gift to the community at the time. And it has made the passage for Montessori schools much easier.
And it's also, it makes the passage because there's a lot of misunderstanding about about it being so difficult, about it being a system for privileged children, about it being all these things. And actually there's so much more in common. And it's actually not that difficult to comprehend for somebody.
No, once again, it's the misconceptions and misunderstandings about what we have to offer the children and the diversity of the provision, this lack of uniform presentation. I mean, the environments may look very similar, but how it's delivered will again depend on the individual. So some of those misunderstandings are to some extent part of the issues with the Montessori community itself, because we don't speak the language of the general population. But some of it is simply because we have not articulated enough, or people have not taken enough time to really study. So they have heard that it was not good, or they have not experienced it. The word of mouth can be quite pernicious sometimes.
Something that really helped us, and it was quite unique again in your practice and what you brought about, was the accreditation process. Because there's one thing is the proper training of your staff. It's very, very important to have their training done, and if possible by institutes that are recognized and have programs that have been proofed by recognized institutions. But then I think it's very important for schools to regularly be put into question, have to look at their practice by somebody from the outside, and know that every 3-4 years they're going to have to look at themselves again. And you made this possible. It was very reassuring for parents to know that the school was accredited regularly and people from the outside would come and see it and everything. And that's not common. You can't find that scheme everywhere.
We were incredibly lucky in the UK in that there were several attempts at establishing an accreditation scheme, but to keep it ongoing and sustainable, it really needed finance from outside. And the Montessori St. Nicholas charity did give quite a substantial amount of money for us to develop the framework and for us to also visit the schools. They subsidized some of the visits for schools, which meant that schools were more likely to commit to the process. What was interesting when we first started, that the team of Montessorians that decided to contribute to creating the framework, we decided on the key principles within 30 minutes. We knew, and that was hugely successful because that showed me that there is a common level of understanding of what good Montessori provision has to offer to children. And the fact that we could keep it rolling, by the time I left Montessori Centre International, some schools had been accredited 4 times in the cycle. So it was running long enough to be a valuable tool for the schools. It was a reassurance for us who have been part of the board that we were providing a good system. We had external board, people who came from other areas of early years education who contributed to the discussions about the accreditations. And that in itself was important too, because you had that outside voice. You had that voice of more common sense, not so emotionally engaged. But the thing that I have learned about the accreditations, or I learned from it for myself, is that the leadership of the school is fundamental. And the commitment of the leadership to professional development is the biggest gift the owners or the managers of the school can give to the staff, because you enter with a certain level of knowledge, as you know yourself, and your knowledge grows. And as you get more experience, you need to continue to have a professional discussion with others. So having a cycle of training sessions or identifying areas for development through the accreditation process, and then investing in development of staff in those areas is very important. For example, what was so valuable for Bloom is that you had a certain vision for the school, and everybody, including the cook, understood what it is that you would like to achieve. Sometimes it was more difficult to achieve than other times, but that there was a shared vision which was supported by everybody and made the growth of the school easier.
And in that way, the accreditation supported this process, because sometimes, even with the best of wills, the staff need to hear that the vision is not just something that the leadership has invented for the pleasure, but that it corresponds to some, real process that is recognized. And because Montessori is not protected anywhere, that anybody can set up as a Montessori school, both for the staff and for the parents, it was very reassuring, and it gave much more credibility to what we were trying to do. The fact that people from the outside would come and reinforce those same vision and principles. And also you had this very transparent document once you finished the accreditation, in which you listed everything, saying, yes, we give accreditation because this is this and this is wonderful, but we still recommend that there's all these other things that you could do to improve. And that's very reassuring, because there's a process happening, and that means that there's an objectivity. And for parents, that was very important.
Yeah, and I think that is really also because there is a dialogue with the parents. There's a meeting for the parents with the assessors. So there's a professionalism about the accreditation, which is really, really important. I was very proud of what we managed to achieve with the accreditation, because it has grown nationally, but Also, it had a slightly different feeling internationally because often people committed to Montessori in countries bringing Montessori to the country, where the accreditation process gave them credibility and also demonstrated that you are part of a larger community with certain level of standards which are expected.
Well, we continue to follow in your steps because although you're no longer there, we were reaccredited by Collaborative Montessori, whom are a big part of your former team.
I'm very happy that that part of the work had continued, yes.
Thank you for that. That's your legacy. We talked about how you supported Bloom with all your kindness and wisdom and patience. But you've worked with a lot of schools, whether in the UK, outside of the UK, and I wanted to ask you what has meant the most to you working alongside schools.
It was this feeling that you are able to support people who are working really hard, who really want things for the children, and also an opportunity to see how Montessori operated within different cultures and what it has given to the children in different cultures. And there was this uniting feeling that on the whole, the children were happy in the Montessori classroom, that they were comfortable doing what they needed to do. So they were allowed to be themselves. And for me, that was really, really important. For example, working with the Tibetan refugees in northern India and seeing how they have created the classroom and helping them to create a Montessori classroom with limited resources, but still delivering the principles of children being able to choose what they wanted to do and being supported in their activities by women who often could not read and write. For me, that was a memorable experience. The fact that the women were so eager to help the children and then creating a situation for the children which would allow them to do that. That whole community was so supportive. They had some babies in the nursery and the mums would come and breastfeed them in their break, so that you would often have these row of mums feeding their babies around 11 o'clock whilst the other children were running outside. The babies were having a feed. And I just felt it was such a wonderful community spirit and how easy it is to create something like that if you really want it, if you are really happy to give. And I suppose that's what I would like people who work with children to really want to do it for the children, because one never does it for the money.
We all know that, yes.
Especially in the UK, it still remains such a very underpaid profession. And yet it is so important to give the children their voice, to give them the power to be themselves, to have the space to play in the way how they need to play, to do things in the way how they need to do them. And, you will have different groups of children in your classroom in different years. There will be the builders and there will be the mummies and daddies and there will be the creators of beautiful work and there will be those ones who just like to dig in the garden. And all of it is absolutely fine because it nurtures something in the children. And if we can give them that space, if we can give them that opportunity, oh, well, what could we wish for? Better gift for their life, for the future. And the other group of women that I was very honored to work with was some of the Syrian refugees. During the Syrian war, we did some training in Lebanon to see how they have sustained their training and how they have delivered it to the children in the refugee camps was really amazing. And really, that's why I say Montessori can work. If the spirit is right, it can work. But then again, any approach to working with children will work if it's really focused on the children and has the sensitivity to honor the needs of the child.
Hearing you speak, I'm terrible at remembering quotes, however often I read them. But there's this beautiful quote, and actually probably parts of text from Montessori where she says that basically honoring the child and honoring and being sensitive to the child is actually honoring our own soul, because the soul of humanity lies within the children. And I'm paraphrasing, but that's not her words. But
no, but that's exactly what I kind of feel, that by helping one child to blossom, you are contributing towards humanity. And I am a deep believer in the goodness in human beings. I know there is lots of strife and lots of difficulty in the world at the moment, but there are still millions of children who are well looked after and supported, who are growing to be caring, decent human beings. And that's probably what education should be about, how to care for each other. And we will need that care for more and more as we go.
Today, anyone can really open a Montessori school and call it Montessori, even without proper training or accreditation or even understanding what Montessori is about. And this can sometimes lead to confusion for parents. It can also weaken the public understanding of what Montessori really is. So do you think there could be value in the Montessori community coming together to agree on a few shared standards or golden principles, sort of global reference, to help ensure authenticity? So that, as a parent or as a teacher, if you want to either work in a school or want to put your child in a school, a way for that person to be able to see, well, there is authentic Montessori practice going on here.
I wonder if that is possible.
Okay.
I think that creating an international standard for Montessori, it's already there. It is in Montessori's writing.
Yeah.
It is.
But Montessori's writing is not really accessible.
I know, it's not accessible to the parents.
Yes.
But it is in the feeling of the school. And also, I think that there is lots of information about Montessori. I think that the work that Simone Davies has done on promoting Montessori for parents, making it very accessible, is a very, very sounding board for parents to see, is this going to work for my child? I think that general information, there is much more freely available about Montessori. Even that what is available is kind of sometimes variable in its quality. But fundamentally, I think parents need to think about, when they come into any early years provision, would my child be happy here? How does my child fit into this environment? And it's quite possible that some parents will feel uncomfortable about what Montessori has to offer, the same way as I was uncomfortable about the wonderful Steiner school I went to look at when our daughter was little. And there were so many things I loved about it, but there was also something that I just couldn't accept. And I knew I couldn't support my child in this environment. And I think it's, again, parents understanding that it is a shared experience for the children. You don't hand over your child to the school and leave them. There needs to be a dialogue. There needs to be understanding of what Montessori has to offer to their children.
So basically, you're saying there's a responsibility on their part to do the research, because there's so much information available now.
There is a responsibility for the parents, and there's also a responsibility for the school to show what it is that they are doing to support the whole child, not to support their literacy skills or their counting skills, but what do we do to nurture this human spirit of your child so that they have a voice when they enter further education?
I understand.
It has to be shared between the parents and the school. It cannot be separate, because the minute there is that separation, it becomes very easy for the parents to begin to blame the school, and the school also sometimes blaming the parents.
Of course.
And so the closer cooperation with parents, creating better understanding from very early on for the parents. So having classes for parents to explain to them what you are trying to achieve or what it is that you are offering the children should be much easier these days. You can take lots of video clips. You can have parents. There's a way of communicating what you have to offer as a provision, because there will be slight cultural differences. So the principles are the same, but how they are interpreted will always be influenced by the culture in which the school operates, and also, to some extent, by the personal interpretation of the leaders.
Of course.
And so there will always be nuances. So rather than creating something that people would always bicker about, oh, this should be more, why don't we all try to really continue to think about what our Montessori provision offers to the children and what the Montessori teacher training should really look like. If I was thinking about what I would like it to be, I would really like Montessori teachers to look more outside the Montessori box, to see that other approaches or current educational trends have got similarities so that we can begin to learn and share this from each other, rather than continue to be just within that Montessori bubble where people constantly try to prove that Montessori is better than other educational approaches. I love it. I have devoted my life to it, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's better than Steiner education, because Steiner education may fit better to somebody for somebody else. I love what Reggio tries to achieve, and Reggio wouldn't be Reggio if it wasn't for their Montessori connections, being created in Italy, learning about the environment and the importance of the environment, but also making the environment so much richer for the children in terms of self-expression and creative opportunities. So I think we need to be better as a community in articulating what we do. We need to be better at sharing our experiences and sharing it with others. And this is one of the reasons why I so enjoyed working with Montessori Europe, because whilst we were all so different, we also didn't want to fit Montessori into one specific box. And I think what we need as a community now is really some solid research from the classroom to demonstrate how what we do connects with current thinking. You know, Montessori is now 100 and something years old. People often say, how it has changed, what has it developed. In the spirit, it hasn't changed, but it has not been opened enough to be able to say, well, we have encouraged children learning from nature by looking after chickens and all those kind of things long before other people. But it doesn't really matter if we did it before others. Let's have a look what it gives to children of today. And being outside for children of today, in competition with social media, in competition with games, in competition with smartphones, that's what we need to think about, how we give it to all the children, how we promote it, rather than thinking, well, you need to be able to wash the table in a certain way. Or I hope it makes sense.
It makes total sense. I think also how I feel is that fundamentally what's important is the values and the principles, and that, you know, for the rest we should allow it to come alive. It's an organic process. It's not a dogma that was created.
And if you think about the values being in trust and respect in the child, if you see it in giving children freedom within the environment which is prepared for them, which demonstrate care and attention to detail, which gives children opportunities to engage with a variety of activities, but also having the capacity to be flexible enough to change the environment if there is such interest in the children, then you are creating something that is really worthwhile for the children to experience, and something that can be documented through our research, can be supported by reading, can be supported by reflection. But I think that we need to work better as teams within the schools or as teams within groups of schools, and we need to be able to offer research demonstrating that we are thinking about current issues.
So looking forward, you've started to talk about it, but after such a long period dedicated to Montessori or to service in Montessori education, what continues to inspire you?
My days with the grandchildren, without any doubt. Every day I spend with them, I see something which I find unique or special or enriching. I love the differences and similarities in their interests, but how they embrace the interests is so different for each one of them. And also being able to support my local community. I now live in a very community-spirited village, and I'm very happy that the children have got this support where they know all the dogs that live in the area, or they know the different people. They take part in community celebrations. So being able to contribute to the community, and I support the local toddler groups. So I go and help to set up the classroom for the children and do little things which just demonstrate that we are not individuals. And this is the interesting link with Montessori, where you encourage the child to be an individual, to have a voice, but voice within a community, a voice which is connected to the people around you, and which is also connected to the world. Mm-hmm. And I think that, looking back, I just love the international element or the global element of the Montessori community, that children around the world have an opportunity to experience this. Maybe it could be more widely spread. Maybe we should be more generous in sharing our knowledge with communities that are not so privileged to deliver it. But it is important to nurture the individual so that they can really contribute to community and be respectful of all people within the world. So that's what I would wish for the children of tomorrow, is to be able to live in a community which supports them, but also gives them a voice to give to others.
So you answered my last question, which was, what would be your message or the dream to the next generation of teachers and parents?
Yeah, I'm sure that parents would want that for their children. And I think that as families become more and more fragmented and live far apart, the community becomes much, much more important. To some extent, the COVID experience has reminded us of that.
Very true.
How something that affects, certainly affected in a drastic way the whole of Europe and other parts of the world, how that brings us together. And suddenly we saw the value of the people who often are overlooked in society. And I would want the children to be always aware that they are connected. There is interdependence within the community. The same way as there is an interdependence in nature, there is also interdependence within the humanity. And the current climate issues demonstrate that we need to really think much more about the effect our behavior today has on the rest of the world. And that initial connection with nature for very young children, I think, would be a good start in understanding the interdependence and how we affect other people around the world by being not very careful with our resources or being demanding of having things.
It's interesting what you think, because it made me think of situations in the classroom. I a lot of children that come to me. So I work in the 3 to 6 full time, and a lot of children who come to me in that age group are terrified of nature in a certain way at the beginning. So if they see a spider in the classroom or a beetle or anything, and touching grass, touching dirt, at the beginning they're a bit awkward, or they don't want to do it. And this morning I saw a little girl, she picked up a spider in the classroom. She took it in her hand and she brought it outside. And I felt such warmth in my heart, because that's you reconnect. That's the reconnecting. It's
absolutely. To suddenly realize that this little spider that could be scary, but is another creature that needs to be given a chance. I think that's such a important beginning.
Absolutely.
For the children, or particularly my middle granddaughter is very competent when she goes to look after the chickens. And I see her at the bottom of the garden, and all the chickens follow her whilst she is tending to them. And I'm just so proud that she's so at one with these little creatures which are dependent on her, and she knows how to do it. It's just really, really wonderful. But you see, we need to demonstrate it as adults. If we demonstrate our apprehensions, the children will very quickly absorb them themselves. So we need to be very good at sharing these positive feelings about nature with the children.
We have such a big responsibility in all that, don't we?
It is a huge responsibility, but it is possible with joyful heart and sense of fun. I think it's really important to laugh with the children and enjoy their little moments of fun.
They are funny. I mean, that's why you do it, right? They're so interesting. They're all their little personalities. So there's this little boy who was having a difficult morning, and he was really pushing the limits, and we tried everything, to talk to him, to offer him different options, but he was just being quite disruptive and destructive. And a certain morning I sat down with him, I said, look, you know what, you're a big boy. You're already 5, you're a big boy, but right now you're behaving like a baby. I'm not saying you're a baby, but you're behaving like, no, I'm not a baby, I'm not a baby. I said, no, you're not a baby, but you're behaving like one. So we have to, you and I have to talk, because, is that what you want to do and everything? So in the end, the conversation worked, and he settled in, and he found something, and he transformed his behavior that morning. But then the next day or the day after, I was being silly with the children outside. I was running around with them, and I stuck my tongue out at him. He stopped, he looked at me, and he said, and now, who is the baby? And I thought, yeah, exactly. You're totally right. Fair enough. But they are so much more advanced in a way than we are. So much more advanced.
And they are very aware, and they just don't always buy into our messages.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I actually missed talking with you. I missed those moments where we have had many of them, but I'm always so grateful to be able to talk to you, and I hope I'll see you in person soon.
Thank you very much, Manis. It has been a real pleasure.